So you've got an Azure API function that is callable from a client-facing website. Now consider if that API calls some downstream APIs, and those APIs cost you some money every time you call them. Well, our API is open on the internet, and that means that Billy Burglar can come along to our API and start consuming that. Now, what happens if Billy Burglar decides to start calling our API thousands of times? Our costs at the back end go up through the roof. We've now been the victim of a denial of wallet attack. We need to protect our API so that only legitimate access from our website is allowed. Let's dive in and fix this. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whenever it is I find you. And if you're new here, welcome along. Security hardening is all about minimizing the surface area that is open to attack. In other words, making it as hard as we can for Steve the hacker to consume our API, either to his advantage or to put us in the poorhouse. Azure Functions provides a user authentication API out of the box, but we can't use this because our website is a public-facing website. It's a company information website. It's not meant to be used by users that log in. So we can't use that in this situation. So how can we secure our API against attack? So what we're going to do is we are going to force users of our API to call an Authenticate method on our API first before they start consuming the rest of our API. That Authenticate method will return them a cookie, and inside that cookie is going to be a JSON Web Token, or JWT as they're more commonly termed. And with that embedded within the browser, this means that we can then return that cookie with that embedded JWT on every call to our API, and we can validate the information contained within that JWT to make sure that it conforms to our security standards that we need from our API. So let's jump over to Visual Studio Code and go and get this done. So here we are in Visual Studio Code with our API that we've previously created open, and we've got our API functions class that exposes our send email message function. So the first thing that we're going to do is create the Authenticate function. So let's go and add another function into this API, and again this is going to be anonymous, and it's going to be a get only request, and we're going to add in our usual check for if it's the development environment that we're using, which we had previously. In our local settings file, we are going to add two new configuration properties. One for the JWT secret, which is our shared secret that we can use to sign the JWT with. And the other one is the JWT audience, which is a value that we can use to validate that it's intended for our particular API. So these are just generated GUIDs. They can be any value. They don't need to be anything specific. I've just used GUIDs for pure randomization purposes, but you can use more meaningful values if you need to, but obviously more meaningful values leave you open to things being more discoverable as well. So these should be embedded inside your Azure configuration for your API. So these values are only used locally. So with that done, we can come back over to our API function. We can get both of those values out of our environment, and we can validate that they've been supplied. So we can do our usual validation that we did previously in our other send email method to check if it's null, and if it's not, then send back an error response to tell you that it's not been configured. So it tells you your API has been misconfigured basically, or it's missing some vital values. We are also going to add in another setting called domain whitelist. Now, what is that all about? So this is essentially a list of referrers that we are expecting to be allowed to call this API. So we can put in a comma separated list in there of valid referrers that will be able to call our API. So if it's called from HTTP localhost on port 3000, we'll allow that. If it's called on HTTPS on localhost port 3000, we'll allow that. As you move this into Azure and your production environments, these URLs should represent your production domain names that will be calling your API. So again, this is just another restriction that we're putting into our API to minimize that surface area for attack. So if the referrer doesn't equal one of these values, we will reject the request, is where we're going. So with that done, let's go and do exactly that. Let's get that value out of the configuration and validate again that it's not empty, and if it is, then we reject the request. Now let's go and get the referrer. So previously I created a get base URL function, so let's just go and have a look at see what that's doing. So that's getting the referrer header out and basically getting the left hand side of that referrer value. So that's how we can use that to check against the domain whitelist values. So back up where we were, and we can say if they haven't supplied a referrer header, then we will also reject this request because we can't validate against our whitelist. But if we do have a referrer header, then we will have some more validation to check that value against our domain whitelist. And so then we can return an error message saying that it's basically not come from a place that we would allow. We can also check the content type. So as this is a GET request, we are intending therefore not to be a content type. So if it contains a content type in the headers, we will also error out. So you can add any other validation on any other headers. You could mandate that certain headers have to be present or not present, etc., etc. This gives you the kind of basis of how you can go about doing that. So the next thing that we need to do is we actually need to come over to the project and add in a reference to the Jwt library that we're going to use. We obviously don't want to go writing all of that code to parse and handle signatures of JWTs and all of that. So we're going to pull in a library to do that for us. And with that pulled in, we can then go and actually create our token. So, and I need a reference. So let's add in the reference, and I need another reference to that one. Okay. So we are going to create a new token with the algorithm specified there, HMAC SHA-256, which is a good strong algorithm to use. We are going to sign the JWT using our secret that we've put into our configuration. And into that JWT, we are going to have the following properties. We're going to put an ID in there, which will be just a unique ID for this particular JWT. We're going to say when it was issued, who issued it. So that will be the caller that's issuing this essentially. So that's so that when we call back, we can check the issuer is the same issuer that requested the token in the first place. We're also going to have a time frame for which the token is valid. So it cannot be valid before now, and it's going to expire in 3 hours time, which for our purposes of a user on a business company website, 3 hours is probably more than sufficient. We could probably minimize that even more, but and worst case they just call again to get another token. So it's not a huge deal. And we specify that we are the audience for this intended token. So, and then finally we encode all of that up into a JWT. Then what we're going to do is we need to add that JWT, as we said earlier, into a cookie. So we need to go and add a constant right up the top for the name of the cookie. So we're just going to call it auth cookie in our case. And then once we've created that, we can use standard C#.NET code to go and create ourselves an HTTP cookie with that name, and it contains our token that we've created. And a few interesting things: we are going to set that it's intended for HTTP only. So that means that any JavaScript cannot access this cookie. Its only intended value is for HTTP transference between the browser and the API. So no one should be able to manipulate this cookie using JavaScript. We say that the path is, it's only going to be sent, this cookie, when they call something with the API path. The same site strict means that the cookie is only sent to the same site where it originated. And secure, you can see here we're using our development environment, so we are relaxing inside development whether or not this cookie will only be sent for HTTPS requests. So if you set this to true, the cookie is only ever sent if it's an HTTPS request to our API. But for development, because we're running on HTTP, we can relax that to false so that the cookie is also sent on HTTP. But that's development only. So in our production environment, the cookie will only be sent if we call our API using HTTPS. And the expires equals null means that this is a session cookie essentially. So the cookie is removed from the browser when the browser gets closed. So next time the user comes in, it's effectively the same as there never having been a cookie for this particular website in the first place. And incidentally, if you want to look up the definition of these any further, then all of this information is available on this particular URL, which I'll put in the comments below. So you can go through and understand. Here it tells you all about what all these different settings that I've just talked about really mean. If you want to go and see someone else's definition of those, you can look there. Okay, so that's our cookie created with our JWT embedded within it. So the last final thing that we need to do is actually send that back in our response. So we create our 200 response and we append the cookie into that response and return out of our function. And that is our Authenticate done. Okay, so let's go and run this up. And we've got our URL there, localhost 771. So if we come over to Postman, you can see I've pasted that into Postman already. It's a GET request. And if I send that in, we get a 400 bad request saying that the referrer header was not supplied. So let's go over and I've added the referrer header there. Let's change that from localhost to something else and send that in, and now we get our whitelist check that's failing. So still a 400 request because we're expecting it to come from localhost 3000 or HTTPS localhost 3000. So let's do localhost in there, send that in again, and now this time we get a 200 response, and you can see that we've got our cookie. So if we go and look at the actual raw headers, we can see that we get our auth cookie that's come back with all the properties that we set on it. So same site strict, it's HTTP only, but a nicer way to look at that in Postman is in the actual cookies view itself. So we can see it's set to a session cookie. It's not set to secure because we're in development. And if we come over to jwt.io, and if I just go back and get my secret and paste that into the secret there, then if I go and get my JWT value from Postman, I should then be able to post that into there and it says that the signature is correct, and it shows me a decoded version of that JSON Web Token. So it shows me that I've got the ID set to the GUID, whatever that was. I've got an issued at, so all of these little pop-ups here kind of help you and show you exactly what it is. So the issued at, and if I pop over that, is a few minutes ago when we generated the token. The issuer is set to that referrer header that I put in. The not before is also set to a timestamp, and the expiry will be 3 hours into the future. So the not before is at 14:19, 3 hours is 17:19, so that's exactly what we want. And then our audience is set to our property that we set for the audience property, so that we can validate when this token gets sent back to us, we can validate that the audience hasn't been tampered with. In fact, that's the whole point of this, is we can validate that none of this information has been tampered with. And just in case you don't like the jwt.io, there is also a jwt.ms, which is Microsoft's version of this, but there's no signature validation in here. So here you can just paste the token in and you get to see exactly the same stuff, but you can click over on this claims area here and it gives you a bit more of a verbose explanation about what that particular JWT property is and its decoded value alongside that. So that can sometimes be a little bit more useful. So just for information. So that's given us our token and we've proved that that's working. So we can get a token back to our website when we authenticate. So let's go and start changing our send email message to actually take account of expecting to get that token back in. If you're finding this useful or interesting, then please feel free to give me a like and subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you get notified when I upload new videos. And if you've got an alternative solution or comments, you think that we can make this a better solution, then please feel free to leave me a comment down below and I'll respond back to you. Okay, let's carry on. So back over into our send email message. We need to do exactly what we did before in terms of getting the properties out of our settings. So let's go and add in the getting of our JWT secret and also validating those. So this is exactly the same code that we've already written. And where should we put that? Right at the bottom of our validation. So somewhere like there will do. Let's just give ourselves a bit more editor space. And now that we've got those in place, we can go and get the cookie from the request, and we're looking for our auth cookie. So if we don't see the auth cookie, we return a bad request. If we do have an auth cookie, we are going to decode that cookie. So we use our JWT again, only this time we are going to decode it. So we're decoding token, which we got out of our cookie, and we're going to use the same algorithm that we used before and the same secret that we used to encode it, and we're going to verify the signature. So we actually verify that the JWT is signed with that particular secret, and hence that proves that it hasn't been tampered with along the way or manipulated in any way. And if we get past that check there, then we can go and get the referrer again, and if referrer has not been supplied in the header, then we can return a bad request, and then we can start testing some of the properties that are in that token to again just verify that nothing's been tampered with. So we're going to get the issuer property and we're going to compare the issuer property against what's our referrer header. So we make sure that the token was issued by the same referrer that is now calling back with the token. So it means that the token hasn't been stolen somewhere and being passed back into us from some other website somewhere. and we return a validation error and a bad request response if that's the case. So we're proving that the person that was issued the token is still the person sending it back in. We will then validate the audience. So we make sure that the intended audience for the cookie matches our audience setting. So again, we're making sure that the JWT hasn't been tampered with in any way. And you can add as many other properties into the JWT and validate them here as you see fit and as fits your needs. So with those in place, let's go and stop this and restart it. And let's get our send email message. Okay, so over in Postman, I've got the send email message set up ready to call as a post request, and we're not passing in anything other than the default parameters at the moment. So when I send that in, I get a 400 auth cookie not found. So that's the first error. So if I go and call to get a cookie again, I can come over and then I've got an auth cookie ready to send back in. So cookie comes in. So if I send that in, I get auth cookie not found. So let's go and quickly put a breakpoint in our function and send that in. Hopefully that will break into our function, and I can step over that and I've got a null cookie. So let's go and look at request.cookies count is 0, so that's saying that we don't have a cookie. But let's go and have a look at the headers and expand that out, and we can see that there is in fact a cookie header coming in, and it is set to our auth cookie. So the reason for this is that we need to go and update some packages in our API. It's a bug basically. So let's go and get the fixed versions of these. So we need to upgrade that from 1.52 to 1.6 and save that, restore that new package, and let's go and run this up again. Build and run. Let's get rid of our breakpoint. And let's send in that request from Postman again. And now we've got a different error, which is one that we would now expect. Referrer header was not supplied. So let's go and add in our referrer. Let's just prove that that gives us back a different error. So it's we're issued the token on localhost 3000, but we're now calling it from something else. So let's fix that to the correct value and send that in again. And now we get the content type header is missing because it's expecting a JSON payload. So we're now back into the rest of our function we've got round our JWT validation. And so this is now going to start saying that the payload is missing and everything else. So that shows that our validation of our JWT is actually working, because we're now getting errors from further down in the code about content type being missing and the payload missing and all sorts of stuff like that further down here. So that's it. That is our secured API with our cookies and our JWTs being passed in. Hope you enjoyed that and you find that useful, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.